Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I am Claudina Nogueira, President of Workplace Health Without Borders for 2024-2025, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar on the Global Strategy on Occupational Safety and Health of the International Labour Organization, the ILO. We are delighted to have all of you join us as we explore this critical topic, which directly impacts the well-being and dignity of workers around the globe. Occupational safety and health, or OSH, is more than just a workplace issue. It's a human right. In 2022, the recognition of a safe and healthy working environment as a fundamental right of workers was a groundbreaking step in reinforcing global labor standards and advancing workers' well-being. This development means that governments and employers worldwide now have an increased obligation to prioritize OSH as an essential human right, not just a regulatory requirement. This landmark development also reinforces the global commitment to safeguarding the millions of people who contribute to our economies and societies every day, whether they work in formal or informal sectors. We are honored today to have as our featured speaker, Mr. Joaquim Nunes, the Chief of the ILO's Occupational Safety and Health and Working Environment branch. Under his leadership, this branch has coordinated the development of the ILO Global Strategy on Occupational Safety and Health, charting a clear pathway to achieving safer and healthier work environments for all. At this webinar, Joaquim Nunes will provide insights into the strategy's key objectives and discuss how it seeks to address some of the most pressing challenges faced by workers, particularly those in vulnerable and high-risk sectors. Once again, welcome and thank you for joining us today. I now hand over to Dr. Yuka Takala, immediate past president of the International Commission on Occupational Health, or ICO, who will introduce our featured speaker, Joaquim Nunes. Over to you, Yuka. Thank you.
Good morning or afternoon from Finland. Dear friends of Workplace Health Without Borders, it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Joaquim Nunes, Chief of the ILO Safety and Health Program. Mr. Joaquim Nunes comes originally from Portugal, and he was appointed Chief of the Occupational Safety and Health of Working Environment branch of the ILO in the ILO's Governance and Tripartism Department earlier this year. He holds a Master of Laws from the Portuguese Catholic University and a postgraduate studies in labor law, occupational safety and health, and public management. He joined the ILO's country office for Central and Eastern Europe in 2011. Before being appointed Chief of the new branch of ILO, he was the Chief of the Labor Administration, Labor Inspection, and Occupational Safety and Health branch of the ILO. Throughout his ILO career, he has been a team lead on labor administration and labor inspections and safety and health. I have learned to know Joaquim for around 20 years, starting from the European meetings of Senior Labour Inspectors Committee, the European Advisory Committee on Safety and Health, and other European activities before he joined the ILO. He has always impressed with his factual approach and consistent action to improve workplace health and safety in Portugal, in Europe, and internationally. I take the opportunity to say a few words on today's event. I'm very happy to see that the Workplace Health Without Borders has started this initiative to introduce the global call to make workers' health a priority. It is encouraging to see so many organizations and institutions endorsing this, starting from international institutions such as PAHO, ICO, IOHA, and many national bodies. Our goal is to convince also the top management of ILO and WHO to provide their full support. Maybe we could have a special category of supporters for these and other similar intergovernmental and national authorities. Let's work all together that this will be a new start to raise workers' health high on the agenda. of not just by institutions, but also ILO and WHO member states, governments, workers and employers globally, and of course to have the media, both traditional and social media, to contribute substantially. And now I will hand over to Joaquim. You will have the floor.
So first of all, a pleasure to be here with you all, and thank you very much, Yuki, for your kind words. Indeed, we know each other for more than, I'd say, probably 25 years now. And what you said, it's quite correct. So in the ILO, we see that the path to change was kicked off some years ago. When let me just provide you some background on what has changed in the ILO and the way that ILO sees occupational safety and health in recent years. So I would say that the first moment when we saw renewed interest and commitment from the ILO on OHS was back in 2017, when there was a tripartite working group made of governments, workers, organizations, and employees organizations that have assessed the whole normative framework of the ILO on safety and health at work and identified the need to renew this framework. And this being said, back then, it was identified as a priority and a need for the organization to develop new standards, well, a new standard or standards covering hazards that were not either covered by the ILO before or were not sufficiently covered. And I'm speaking here of biological hazards. As you may know, we started the standard setting process leading to the possible adoption of a convention and a recommendation this year. And the second discussion will happen in June 2025. And I hope that, then in some months, we'll have the pleasure to inform you that, the ILO has now new standards addressing biological hazards in working environment, quite important, namely also knowing that other UN agencies are very much working on the issue, including WHO and the Pandemic Prevention, Preparedness and Response Accord. The same working group has also identified as a need for new normative action, all that relates to chemical hazards, also ergonomics, and the standards of the ILO on safety of machinery. So this is a process that has started and that lets us know that there is this renewed commitment of our constituents towards safer and healthier workplaces. Then again, in June 2022, as Claudina just mentioned, there was, I would say, a landmark decision adopted by the International Labour Conference when it recognized, after intense debates, not always easy, that indeed safe and healthy working environments, or the right to a safe and healthy working environment, deserves to be at the forefront of labor rights, and as such should be considered as a fundamental principle and right at work. Why is this so important? Because sometimes, especially those colleagues that are not so much used to hear about the ILO, well, the importance is the following. The ILO is a normative UN organization, and we do adopt, well, our constituents adopt, so governments, employers, and workers' organizations, they adopt conventions and recommendations. Conventions and recommendations are international treaties, and as such, the convention, which is the binding instrument, it becomes binding to a given member state only when it's ratified. So when we say that the ILO has more than 40 standards on occupational safety and health, and as a matter of fact, 21 conventions on safety and health at work, this does not apply that all of these conventions apply. This does not mean, sorry, that all of these conventions apply to all of our member states. Well, they apply to our member states once the member state ratifies the convention. But there is one exception. What we call in the ILO as the fundamental conventions, and now we have two OHS conventions that have this status, Convention number 155 and Convention number 187. Just for the fact that a given country is a member of the ILO, there is a moral and a legal obligation to respect, to promote, and to realize the rights enshrined in those instruments. So this means that since June 2022, every single one of the 187 member states of the ILO have this obligation to promote safety and health at work, namely in terms of developing sound and resilient national frameworks composed of universal policies, programs or strategies, as you want to call it, but also ensuring that all the pieces of the system stemming from legislation, compliance mechanisms, data, occupational health services are indeed in place and that they are working properly. This landmark decision on itself has already resulted in an accelerated path of ratification of these two conventions and also other standards, because it gave a clear signal to constituents, to countries, especially to governments, that indeed the assembly made up of all the ILO's constituents has decided that, as a matter of fact, this is a critical labor right. Of course, that when this decision was made, we started looking into what was guiding the action of the ILO in the area of occupational safety and health, and what, well, I have to recognize is that the strategy that had been adopted on OHS dated back already from 2003, meaning that there was a need to update this strategy so that it responds to the current needs of governments, of workers, of employers, and this is what we have done. So we have started a process of also long consultations and an assessment of the needs that we have in different member states, in the global north, the global south, to see, so what should we do so that, as a matter of fact, indeed, this new fundamental right becomes a practice in all of our countries, and with the long-term objective of course, the Vision Zero, that is again quite difficult to achieve, but still it has to be a goal, having zero accidents, zero diseases due to work in any workplace, in the public and in the private sector. So after consultations, after assessing the reality of countries, we came out with a strategy that I think that you saw already on the slide, that I would ask to show again, just to explain to you, so how the ILO envisages, well, our action as an organization, but at the same time also how do we see that different member states should organize their policies in a way to have a comprehensive approach to safety and health at work. So the strategy, as you can see, the goal is to support our constituents in the realization of the fundamental right to a safe and healthy working environment. And it's composed of three pillars. I would say that two of the pillars are quite traditional. This is pillar one. So pillar one asks the member states to develop the sound, resilient national safety and health frameworks that I mentioned before. And these frameworks, you will see the content of the framework very well defined in the two fundamental conventions, Convention 155 and Convention number 187, which I recommend you to consult, to read, if you still do not know them. Then again, what's important to refer is that the strategy is quite clear in terms of saying that all the elements of the national system, of the national framework, they complement each other. So you may have a wonderful, a recording and notification system, a wonderful system providing you with statistics on injuries and diseases. But for example, if you don't have, an effective system to provide assistance and expertise to companies on safety and health at work, then, everything may fall apart because one critical element, is not there, is missing, or is not effectively performing as it should. Pillar number three, also, I would say quite traditional. It says, something that we all know, especially those of us that work on a day-to-day basis, with safety and health at work, that, well, you need to manage occupational safety and health in the workplace in a way that is adapted, adequate to not only the features of the workplace, but also the features of the workforce. So again, all that you do in terms of risk assessment, adoption of preventive and control measures, they do need to be specific to the each workplace and each worker, with all the different characteristics that these may have. Pillar number 2 is the one that brings some novelty, to some extent at least, when we clearly state that, well, it's wonderful and it's a requirement to have a sound national system with a very good health policy, reviewed periodically, of course, in consultation with employers and workers organizations, a national strategy, well-resourced, but this will not work if you keep inside your silo, meaning we will only be effective in terms of preventing diseases and injuries related to work, and with the long-term goal of 0 accidents and 0 diseases, if we mainstream prevention, if we mainstream occupational safety and health in so many other public policies addressing other public goods. Some of them are quite evident. You need to, of course, to embed OHS into national health policies, environment, all that relates to education, urban planning, industrialization. So the challenge here is for each member state, each country, in consultation with all the different stakeholders, employers, workers' organizations, and let me say also civil society organizations. They need to understand how the system operates as a whole, and make practice or make use and give practice to something that we all hear as a kind of a buzzword that is currently adopted for any kind of public intervention, to have a whole of government approach to safety and health at work. And this is very important because it requires the inter-articulated action, coordination between ministries and authorities that do not often work together. Also, what this pillar 2 of the strategy says is that, well, fine, it's very good to have, again, a good policy, a good strategy, etc. But we need strong political commitment. We need a strong political commitment at a global level, at a national level, and at a local level, and we need investment. The problem that we have in many countries, and in particular in developing countries, but not only, is that indeed priorities are so many, and governments have to address so many needs, that quite often safety and health at work stays as the poor relative that only receives the resources that can be received. And this is not acceptable. I mean, we are speaking here of protection of human life. We are speaking here, as also mentioned before, the core human right. And again, the resources need to be allocated. You will see countries where you don't even have a national qualification framework at different levels, academic level, technical level, to put out there in the market specialists, experts that have as a job, as a mission, to provide the expertise to the workplaces. You have countries where you don't have a sufficient number or almost none occupational physician. You have countries with very poor systems in terms of statistics on occupational safety and health. So all of this needs investment, and this is what we are asking for with pillar number 2. Of course, that the strategy defines what we think should be done, but we go more in detail than that. So the strategy comes together with a plan of action. The plan of action goes from 24 this year up to 2030. And what we are proposing there is exactly on what the office will be doing, but also trying to say that this is also what we see that countries should do as well, in terms of giving effect to the strategy and to the objective of the strategy. So once again, renewing international labor standards on OHS, promoting ratification, and very much supporting member states and constituents of the ILO to implement the standards. It's not only ratifying them, it's also, of course, implementing their provisions. Very much also focus on new knowledge, especially in terms of, emerging and re-emerging hazards and risks. We have, technology, climate change, etc. A novelty here is that we want to be a bit more influential, in what regards knowledge generation on OHS. So we are planning to start publishing a triennial outlook report, providing us information on global, regional, and national trends on where we are in terms of national frameworks, and on where we are in terms of specific policies to address specific hazards and risks, etc. Of course, that we need to be quite strong still on advocacy and awareness raising. We need, of course, to continue to provide assistance to constituents, and also to have a very strong voice in the multilateral arena. And this is something that we are doing, I hope, consistently, by bringing the subject of occupational safety and health with the agendas of other UN agencies, multilateral banks, regional banks, etc., even when it's not evident that this is something that also pertains and it's relevant for their mission. So this is, in a nutshell, what I wanted to share with you in terms of, what the ILO has been doing on OHS. Of course, this is quite an ambitious agenda, and we need to work with all of you so that this, really brings something into the objectives into fruition. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Joaquim. We've really hit the ground running today with so many points and food for thought for this afternoon's discussion. So I encourage people to please post your questions in the chat box. I don't see a Q&A facility. Are we going to have one, Marianne, or do we just use the chat box?
We have Q&A. People can raise their hands. I'm going to allow people to unmute if they speak, but please keep yourself on mute if you're not speaking. And so people can either post questions in the chat or raise your hand, your virtual hand, which is under in my screen, the React button. There's an option for raising your hand. And then, Claudina, you can call on people whose hands are raised.
Okay. Well, I would kick off with the first question, which was actually posted in the chat box already. So I'll just read that one to Joaquim. It is from Nathan in Canada. And he says, more of a technical curiosity. Can a fundamental convention still apply if it is not ratified by a member country? Or is it solely a moral one if the country does not ratify it?
Should I reply to this one already?
If you want to, yes. While we're waiting for the next ones.
Sure. So there is a difference between fundamental conventions and the other conventions. So as I said, conventions of the ILO as international treaties, they are binding only when ratified, but the fundamental conventions, so there is this not only obligation to promote their principles, again, so there is not an obligation to comply in detail with all the provisions of the convention, but when the convention says that the country should have, a policy, should have a strategy, and several elements of the system should be in place. So there is this duty of the member state, to undertake any kind of action so that this may happen. And it's not only that, is that starting this year, and as a matter of fact, we started to receive these reports a couple of months ago, all the member states that have not ratified Convention 155 and Convention number 187 have the duty, here, yes, a formal duty, to report to the ILO every year on what they are doing to give practice to implement the principles of these two conventions. So as you can see, this is already a very strong, I would say, trigger to stimulate ratification, because even when you consider, the bureaucratic obligations of member states, instead of reporting with kind of a longer term periodicity on how they are applying international labor standards, they have to report every single year to the ILO what they are doing, and of course the ILO may react, and this is made publicly, it's publicly informed to all the member states.
Thank you, Joaquim. I have two hands that I see. I'm going to ask Fabian Liskowitz to unmute and to ask his question if he'd like to.
Yeah, thank you. Greetings from Berlin, Germany. I have a question about the guiding principles that you were showing on the slide of the OHS strategy. Could you explain again? So this strategy was passed in 2003 by the ILO governing body, and also the part about the gender transformative approach, or is it just where did the gender transformative approach come into this? Because those are heated debates we are seeing in the standard setting discussion. So it would be good to know what was decided when, by whom.
Sure. No, so this strategy was adopted in November last year by the governing body. So it supersedes the strategy adopted in 2003. And this is it was one of the reasons to review the strategy, because it was more than 20 years old. And if you see the strategy and the plan of action, because you mentioned the standard setting, all that is related to standard setting is already there. So this is part of action area number 1, that refers to all the standard setting on biological hazards, chemicals, ergonomics, etc. But where you also find, action to be undertaken, responding also to other governing body requests in terms, for example, of developing new guidelines on chemical hazards, on reviewing the code of practice on safety of machinery. So all of that is there. The only nuance that I'd like to give you, and I think that maybe you are aware of this, is that the dates are still, many of the actions proposed there are still to be confirmed. Because, for example, now we know that standard setting on chemicals is already tabled for 27 and 28, but we still don't know when the standard setting on ergonomics or safety of machinery will start, because that's still to be decided by the governing body.
Thank you, Joaquim.
I was just going to refer to something that Fabian mentioned, because just, for sake of time, I didn't say that also so in addition to the 3 pillars, the strategy has some guiding principles. And those guiding principles is, of course, that all that the ILO will be doing is informed by international labor standards, social dialogue. We also need to take into account all that relates to gender. And something also very important, we want to adopt a life cycle approach, meaning that we have to start dealing with prevention, from an early age through education, but also, for example, considering job transitions. So when one worker moves from one occupation to another, there's also the need to include in any requalification, new training to be provided. Also, information and training on safety and health at work.
Thank you, Joaquim. I'm going to take 2 hands that are raised, and then I'm going to go to the chat box because there's a few questions that have come in. I'm going to go to Stephen Hempeley and ask him to unmute and to ask his question, please. Go ahead, Stephen.
So, Joaquim, thank you for your presentation. You mentioned kind of in passing climate change. And I was interested in what the ILO has as far as resources in terms of adaptation to climate change in the workplace, which includes heat stress situations as well as other extreme weather events. And is there any role for ILO in the actual mitigation of climate change? That has to happen because we are in a crisis mode with respect to our climate.
Indeed, Stephen. So we are quite active, in that front. So what I can say is that we do have, some pieces of research launched this year on climate, on heat stress, and one of them, I have to say that we were very satisfied to know that the global call to action, of Antonio Guterres on heat. Included, as one of the 4 areas, of critical importance, labor and occupational safety and health. So, and this was also a result of meetings we had at the UN level. We are very present in all that relates, for example, to the sound management of chemicals. So the GFC that was adopted, the new global framework on chemicals adopted in Bonn more than a year ago, also has clear references to safety and health at work and labor. As a matter of fact, there is a target specifically on labor. We are present also in all that relates to the discussions on plastics, etc., etc. Of course, that our approach is also, from the labor perspective and the workplace perspective, not so much on the environment, etc. Something that I can tell you is that in addition to research, it's already agreed or approved that in February 2026 we will have a meeting of experts that will lead hopefully to ILO policy guidance on how to address OSH and extreme weather events and changing weather patterns. So we do hope that within a year and a couple of months, there will be new tripartite, adopted guidance from the ILO, on how to address these issues. So yes, we are active there. And again, I wouldn't be surprised that the standard setting or the upcoming standard setting on chemicals, etc., will also have some references to climate, or climate, or consequences, on the management of chemicals related to climate changes.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Stephen. Marianne, please go ahead and unmute. Marianne from WHWB in Canada.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you so much, Joaquim. That was a wonderful talk. I wanted to flag a question that's in the chat and also add my own tag question to it. Igor Bello asked, how can professional associations align themselves with the ILO vision and influence policy in countries? I had a similar question, and I was very interested to hear you say that you are trying to get the other UN agencies to put occupational health high on their agendas. I'm not terribly encouraged to see that they are doing that. Not surprisingly, we have similar issues in our respective governments. So I'm wondering how organizations like ours, like those represented here, civil society organizations, can help influence that so they do elevate occupational health on their agendas.
Well, there's so many ways, that you for example, you're very important pressure points. You can lobby, at different levels, again, to have stronger, systems of safety and health at work. I would say that what I would see as being the most relevant, interventions, of course, in addition to political lobby, etc., would be very much to protect the class, to protect the role of occupational safety and health practitioners, and also the role of those all of those that work with safety and health at work. So when I mentioned that in many countries that a major problem we have is the fact that you don't have enough professionals in the market. It's also the fact that quite often professionals are not organized, so their voices are not heard. And if your voices are heard, and I'm speaking here of OSH professionals, very much lato sensu, of course that we are all working towards the same goal, and the goal will be, of course, also always the protection of life at work. So again, political lobbying, whenever there is a new debate on any legal reform on safety and health at work, a new policy, or because a new policy or the policy is not being reviewed, or again asking for more investment, more commitment to us, that's very important. And there's a role to be played by civil society organizations that other organizations cannot do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joaquim. I see another raised hand, but I'm going to go to the chat first because there are a couple of questions that have come through. So the first one is from Olena Chapovalov, and she says, you mentioned a number of very important occupational hazards, for example, chemical, biological, ergonomics. Has there been any recent discussion or development in the psychosocial and psychological hazard area at the ILO level?
Yes, indeed. Also, if you see, again, I do invite you all to read this strategy I mentioned and the plan of action. It's available on the ILO's website. I can put you the link here later on. You will see there that there will be tripartite discussions at the ILO on what kind of action is to be undertaken by the ILO in relation to mental health. So we do have, a wealth of knowledge, publications already developed on this, but there is no tripartite guidance. And this is something that we still don't know exactly what kind of guidance this will be, because this has to be agreed, of course, between the governments, the employers, and the unions. But the plan already exists, and the intention is to have these tripartite consultations still, during the implementation of this plan of action from 24 to 2030. I think that we are planning this for 28. But again, dates, still need to be confirmed, because this is something that it's not a decision of the office; it's a decision of our constituents. But if you read the plan of action, it's there.
Okay, thank you, Joaquim. I'm going to take another question in the chat before going back to the participants raising their hands. So Glenn Shaw asks, is there any kind of international enforcement procedure for the fundamental conventions? If a country does not implement, can they be sanctioned in any way?
No. And the same happens to ratified conventions. Again, there is a system that you could say that it compels member states to comply, which is the fact that, again, reports have to be sent periodically to the ILO. There is an independent group of experts that goes through the reports. They provide observations to the member state. These observations are public. Quite often they are important, for example, for when it comes to commercial relations, because countries with trade agreements or with any kind of other commercial relation, quite often, those that are importing or exporting the products, they do take into account the comments of supervisory bodies. So that's quite important. And again, worst case scenario, if a given country is found to be really in non-compliance with a given standard, the ministry, the government is called to come to the International Labour Conference, so this General Assembly where you have all of our member states, and to explain why the government is not complying with the convention. So this is very, it's strong in the sense that it's a kind of bad publicity that countries want to avoid, but it's the kind of sanction that we have. Well, worst case scenario, a country that would violate all ILO standards that would have been ratified could be expelled from the organization. That would be like in a catastrophic situation, and it does not really happen in practice.
Thank you. René LeBlanc from Canada, I see that you have your hand raised. Please go ahead.
Bonjour, Joachim.
Bonjour.
So thanks for your presentation. Joachim, I'm wondering, as we know, ILO is tripartite, unions, employers, government. As you know, many countries has 60 to 80% informal workers. How ILO adjusts their strategy to be able to be more impactful on these countries that have low or high informal workers? I know you work with ISA, of course, but can you tell us more what ILO is doing to address this situation? Thank you.
Sure. Look, our priority there is to formalize, because again, it's by formalizing that, and then you bring people into the system, so that the law is applicable to all the informal work, all the workers, that they also have access to credit, etc. So the option is to formalize, but of course, as formalization can take years or decades. What we do, it's mostly at three levels. Again, we try to work with governments and of course the social partners, which sometimes they are absent, because we are speaking here of informality, and also the voices need to come from different places, to try to look for options to extend protection, to extend OHS protections to workers and economic units that are informal, because accidents and diseases will happen being formal or being informal. Then what we also do is to adapt our message, our materials, to the reality of informal work settings, where quite often people are either illiterate or with very low levels of formal qualification. So we simplify the message, and we did this very much, during COVID-19 in markets, for street vendors, for example. Just messages, that will be pictograms, with recommendations. The other thing that we do quite often, for example, in agriculture, is using what we call participatory oriented training methodologies, where for example, we work with agricultural extension workers and the farmers in a farm, and we have several manuals that maybe WHYS, WISC, etc., which are manuals with drawings or pictures on what you do, what you should do, what you shouldn't do. So we train them using those manuals. Then there's a practical component of the training where they visit the workplace to identify themselves, non-conformities or what needs to be improved, and then they go back to their farms and they put in practice those teachings. And I have to say that this, even if it seems non-effective from a perspective of resources, what we see is quite often, we have, hundreds of improvements in workplaces that are many times very simple, but, people didn't think about. So this is, I would say the modest contribution that the ILO does. I mean, because the phenomenon is, and the problem is huge, as you know.
Thank you, Joaquim. I see that Lawrence has lowered his hand, so I'm assuming his question has been answered. I'm not sure if you still
no,
want to ask.
Cody, I'd like to proceed if I may.
Okay, go ahead.
Bonjour, Joaquim. In April of this year, the World Health Organization issued an important document recognizing aerosol transmission of COVID-like diseases. The name of the document was Indoor Air Risk Assessment in this context of SARS-CoV-2. Has ILO considered pursuing this, promulgating the lessons of this kind of document, given that probably, I'm going to take a guess, more workers died of COVID during the pandemic than perhaps any other occupational disease within a year? I'm not talking about asbestos. I wonder if you could comment.
Look, the best contribution that we are preparing to in terms of addressing COVID and many similar diseases is through the new instrument on biological hazards. And let me stress that this is the first time in the ILO we don't have any norm, any standard on any convention, any recommendation on biological hazards. You have some articles in some conventions, in some recommendations, but not a standard itself on this. And what we are preparing is a standard that applies to situations of pandemics, epidemics, but also to the normal day-to-day in terms of exposure to any kind of biological agent. And if all goes well, so constituents have decided this year that there will be a convention, so it's binding, and there will be a recommendation. This, of course, has to be confirmed next year because this is a 2 years sitting process. But this is the major contribution that we will have. More than any statement, because statements, they provide, they can influence, they provide some guidance, but they're not binding. So what we do hope is that, by having a new binding instrument next year, that will inform the development of legislation in member states, that will be an important step towards not only COVID-19 or any other kind of infectious disease, but also to complement what I just said, for the ILO to be able to provide that kind of statement, even through sometimes policy brief. So of course that we need always to consult with workers and employers, which means that it may require some time. So our priority now is to focus on the standard setting, on the new instruments, on biological hazards, and then the rest, we will see.
Thank you, Joaquim.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go back to the chat. There's a question here from Akeza Askadom from Ethiopia. He firstly says, thank you for the presentation. And then he says, the issue of occupational health and safety in low-income countries is so challenging. It is also worse in conflict-affected regions due to competing priorities. Is there any ILO-initiated special consideration to ensure safety and health of workers in regions that are affected by conflict?
Indeed, there is a special program in the ILO for crisis that also includes an OSH component. And I can say, for example, that, in Ukraine, the ILO is quite present, in terms of addressing, OSH concerns, since of course, the crisis with Russia started. For example, with a very big focus on mental health, we are present, in, for example, if you think of crisis, in regions affected by earthquakes, etc., for example, or even war. For example, providing that reconstruction efforts also, embed, OSH concerns, so that, prevention is, also something that is included, because quite often, reconstruction needs to happen fast, and prevention, preventive measures may not be, the main worry or priority of all those involved in planning reconstruction. So our role there is also to make sure that prevention is considered. And, we have been active in so many countries, following earthquakes, for example, so that working with governments, working with employers, working with the unions, so that indeed, prevention is also part of the game.
Thank you. Also in the chat, Amani Wahid asks, could the ILO National Office work with academia to transfer experiences in education and research?
Of course, and we do that already, in several places. Again, one thing that, I think it's clear. If it's not clear, I'll also say that as an organization, we also have our resource constraints. So we cannot be, in all the countries at the same time, because we don't have the resources for that. But we do work with many countries in terms of developing, the national OSH qualification frameworks. There's a very interesting study published, I think last year already, comparing, different education frameworks in different member states. We have developed in the meantime a methodology, to assess the needs of these frameworks, and we do work with academia in so many countries, namely, through projects. And for example, when we were speaking of heat stress a while ago, we are currently working with a couple of universities, for example, in Mexico, in Vietnam, to assess the effects on the health of workers in agriculture that are exposed to to high temperatures, in terms of kidney disease, etc. And we do hope to have the results of these studies available very, very, very soon, because this will also enable us to provide better policy recommendations.
Okay. There's a similar question, I suppose, because it's also related to climate change, and it's from Morgan Mazaruda, who says, I do understand that the ILO is working with the Southern African development community on decent working construction. Is there some project on the issue of climate change in the Southern African development community in partnership with ILO for the benefit of workers in the construction industry?
So on that one, as we are a big organization, I would need to consult, because I have a general idea of projects that exist in different regions. I do not know of any particular project in construction in Africa addressing climate change, but I may be wrong. But I'll be happy to revert back to the participant with more information when I have it.
Thank you. Bernard Fontaine has two questions which I'm going to combine. So he asks, has anyone aligned the cost of occupational health in terms of gross domestic product to governments and industry in various countries to implement or update policies, programs, and SOPs? And also, do you believe that cost or tax incentives would be a financial pillar to protect worker health and improve human performance, productivity, and productivity? Cost or tax incentives?
Yes, so we have done it in the past in terms of estimating the cost of or it's a very complex exercise, I have to say, but it's in our plans. Again, if you consult the plan of action that I'm always referring to, you will see that there's a reference there to new research on the business case on OSH, and also on, well, three things: the business case on OSH, the cost of safety and health and prevention, compared to GDP, but also very much studies on sustainable financing options for countries to invest on occupational safety and health. So this is work that is now starting. I mean, we hope that we have something available, I would say in a couple of years, because it's quite complex to undertake this kind of studies. But yes, it is planned, and we hope to have it well, not very soon, but in some years.
Okay. Peter Baldwin, who is from WHWB in the UK, has a very interesting question, which he says, what are the major barriers to countries engaging with the ILO strategy, and how can they be overcome? I think this is subject for another webinar, but please go ahead, Joaquim, with your thoughts on that.
Not say barriers. We have to understand that many countries, they do face many challenges. And you were speaking about crises such as armed conflict, earthquakes. So much, all that relates to climate change, tsunamis, etc., hurricanes. So especially for countries that struggle, with the financial conditions that they have, OSH may not always be in the forefront of their concerns. So we also understand that, and this is also why the ILO, namely through projects, provides direct assistance to the governments, to the workers, to the employers, so that the systems can be strengthened. So I wouldn't say barriers. I would say that yes, countries face constraints that may lead them, to not be so active as they could in terms of promoting safety and health at work. But this is also, what the ILO is there. To assist them. To the extent that we can, because again, as I said before, our resources are also limited.
Right. Okay. A question in the chat from Sashikala Chandrasekhar in India. She says the ILO strategy on OSH is important for achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals 3 and 8, which are good health and decent work. Is there any time period set for the plan of action to achieve the ILO goal?
Yes. So the plan of action is to be, it goes until 2030. You will see that the goal of the strategy is to assist member states in realizing the fundamental right to safe and healthy working environments, and the realization of that right differs from many things, including ratifying ILO standards and effectively implementing the ILO standards, and then again having in place all the different pieces of the national frameworks, the policies, the strategies, the data, occupational health services, compliance, legislation, etc. So this is what the ILO is intending to do. So we say, because we also want to be honest with ourselves and with constituents, is that the goal of the strategy is not to directly, decrease the number of fatalities, at work, or injuries and diseases, is to assist member states, to have the elements in place that will result in that reduction, because the reduction is something that, it's not in our purview, it's not in our, it's in our mandate, but it's not in our capacity, alone to measure that, and to say that, a reduction in the number of injuries and diseases would be would happen just because the ILO, was working with a given country. We all know that would be serious. But yes, the frame for action is until 2030. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Joaquim. I have a question from Dorothy Wigmore, also in the chat, who says, even when we have voices and are organized, one of the most discouraging things in this COVID-19 pandemic has been how occupational health and safety has been sidelined or ignored or dismissed at international, national, and regional levels. What efforts is the ILO making to change this, especially given your strategy?
So, as I said, many things. First of all, making OSH more present in the international agendas, and the international agendas are not only at the level of the UN. So I mentioned the multilateral banks, international financial institutions, but also at the level of the governments. So we use the opportunities that we have to flag the importance of safety and health at work. Again, when I mentioned all the elements that are needed, for a system to operate effectively, one of the things that the ILO does quite often, of course, always in agreement with the government, is exactly to assess the situation in the country, and which we call the national OSH profile. Part of the assessment of the situation looks exactly into OSH qualifications, into the role, into how professions related to occupational safety and health are regulated, access to the professional, incentives for the profession. So the profile is, in a way, the portrait that gives you, in a nutshell, the full information on where the country stands. And then the profile, the objective is that it leads to a roadmap, to a plan of action, to implement all those measures that are needed in the country, that again, most often also require, to invest again on, education frameworks, occupational health services, the extension of these services to more workplaces. We know that, according to studies, that even in industrialized countries, these services don't cover more than 50% of workplaces. So this is again a big need of countries. So this is again what the ILO does. So at international level, but also very much at national level, including assisting our member states to understand what are the critical needs they have to move forward.
Thank you. I also want to thank the participants who have posted a number of links in the chat box about the publications that are related to the questions that we are having here today, and Joaquim is answering, so thank you very much. I have a question here from Thomas Gassett. Thank you so much, Dr. Nunes. Does the ILO have any thoughts about convening a new joint ILO, sorry about that, new joint ILO WHO committee meeting, because the last one was more than 20 years ago, to help the ILO plan of action and to collaborate and give directions to member states, especially focusing on climate change, on heat and work and pandemics at work, which there have been questions about all of these issues this afternoon. So that's from Thomas Gassett.
Yes, so we collaborate almost on a daily basis with the WHO. The organization of a new meeting of the Joint Committee that hasn't met for many years, as you know, needs to be something that is approved by our governing body. So again, yes, we have been checking with the governing body on opportunities for this to happen, but I cannot advance more than that because it's not under my capacity to decide. It's something that needs to go through the governing body. Let's hope that yes, it will happen soon.
Okay, Marianne, I just want to check that we're okay for time. It's 6:05. Can we carry on?
I think that is up to our guest. We do appreciate very much, Joaquim. You have been staying longer than the original hours scheduled. I see there are a few more questions, so it's really is up to our guest. Are you willing to stay for a few more minutes?
Okay to stay?
I can do a couple of 5-6 minutes more, no problem.
Okay, 5-6 minutes more. Okay, I see there are a couple of more questions. I'll get to Rene again. He's raised his hand. I just wanted to raise another issue that was raised by Bernard Fontaine. He says, we have seen progress in developing flyers on the use of storage of pesticides in Nigeria. So this speaks to the chemical hazards in your strategy. These pictograms are better than the GHS pictograms used for hazard communications. Do you think the ILO should consider expanding this concept to other occupational health concerns?
Not sure if I understood the question in terms of extending pictograms to other hazards rather than chemicals.
Other than chemicals, I think that's what
other
he
than
means.
chemicals, yes. Well, again, it's something that we could consider. As I said before, well, these are not official pictograms, but we have used pictograms quite often when working with some, segments, of enterprises in the informal economy, etc. In terms of officially coming out with new pictograms, new ILO pictograms to address other occupational hazards, no, there is no immediate plan for that. Again, it's a process that would need to go through also a heavy procedures, of tripartite approval. So it's not in our plan, no.
Thank you, Joaquim. I think we'll take one last question from Rene, who has his hand raised. Please unmute, Rene, from Canada.
Hello. Yes, it's not exactly a question, it's more a proposal, Joaquim. Be sure I greatly value all the work done by ILO, but there's also many interaction that has to be done through WHO with respect to countries. And as you know as well, there's many political aspects that are done by governments of each country. I wondered at which point it would not be relevant to have a secretariat on OSH at the UN, just like there's a secretariat on environment. I think it would be good to have the UN having the ILO, having the WHO, having some NGOs as well, being all together on a secretariat at the United Nations, where we could discuss a global strategy to address occupational health and safety worldwide.
So, in the UN, the ILO is the agency with the mandate to deal with occupational safety and health. And the UN does have, a structure to address, a common system of occupational safety and health, but within the UN, so applicable to the UN agencies, and the ILO is very much present there. And for example, it has been decided that, the applicable references are the ILO standards, codes of practice, guidelines, which is already very, very good for us. I think that any network of UN agencies, any structure that could help us, to have a stronger voice, of course, that would be welcome. I would see very much the ILO, having the leading seat on that one, just because it's part of our mandate. And again, I mean, we are the ones that know better than any other organization our standards. Otherwise, it would be quite difficult. Again, it's a political discussion. The UN is a very complex organization, but I would be very much in favor of that, of course.
Thank you, Joaquim. I think we should wrap up. I think I don't see any more questions that we should. Okay, one last one from Thomas Gassett. Would you kindly comment on the status of Convention 161, Occupational Health Services, in the context of the OSH fundamental rights?
Yes. So, when the whole discussion on, I'm sorry because my light just went off, so I'm a bit in the dark. So when the whole discussion was ongoing on, which are the conventions that should become fundamental, Convention 161 was mentioned as one of the possible fundamental conventions. Again, the practice and the tradition in the ILO is that when you have a fundamental right, it comes with two conventions. And when assessing which are the ones that really are the most relevant from our standpoint, it was decided that it would be Convention 155 and Convention number 187. But if you see, for example, once again, the strategy and the plan of action, you will see that there's a very direct reference to the need to promote ratification and implementation of C161, because the ratification levels are not famous. I have to say that it's a very honestly, it's a complex convention to implement. So I think that we may have some resistance from some member states to ratify it, because it requires to take measures that some other conventions may not require. But again, still, of course, that we advocate for the ratification, obviously, and we stand ready to help the member states to ratify and then to implement. But the level of ratification is low. I cannot tell you right now, I need to consult, but probably around 30 to 40 member states have ratified the convention only, including in industrialized countries.
Thank you very much, Joaquim. I think it's time to wrap up, and I'll take this opportunity to thank you very much for spending your time and sharing your expertise with us today. I think we had very nice engagement. You touched on how workers, both in formal and informal sectors, will benefit from the ILO strategy. And you also spoke about opportunities for collaboration. You discussed pathways for collaborative action, such as public and private partnerships, work empowerment, and capacity building. And we're very thankful for all the food for thought that you have left for us today. And this is lots to think about and to really come back to you with more questions. So this shift reaffirms the ILO's commitment to decent work for all and lays a foundation for collective efforts to make workplaces safer across the globe. So thank you very, very much for your inputs, and I thank all the participants for joining us. We've had a very nice turnout, and I wish you well. Please travel safely and enjoy the year-end holidays. Thank you very much for joining us.